Hi, welcome to the first exercise on smartorial.com. What I've done here is that I've traced the outlines of these basic primitive shapes onto marker paper. The marker paper that I've used was Bienfang 360. And if you don't know what it looks like, here it is. This is an incredibly versatile translucent marker paper, and it can take a lot of ink and abuse, and it'll let colors blend very smoothly because it's coated at the top. Now, one of the things I like to do is the minute I rip it from the sheet, I put a little pencil mark in the lower right hand corner. And the reason why I do that is because from the front to the back, you can't tell the difference. You can't tell which side is coated unless you mark the paper. And if you had many loose sheets on the table and you're working really fast and it's hectic, all of a sudden you don't know if you're working on the correct side, the coated side, or not. And I don't want you to ruin your work, so the first thing you should do is definitely mark the lower right hand corner. It's a little trick I learned. Now, this sheet I can provide for you at the link at the bottom of this page. What it is it's basic primitive shapes, and you can download it when you click on the link, and I'd like for you to print it out and just transfer it onto the marker paper. Now, what I use to transfer it is a Pilot razor point pen. The reason why I use this ink is because it doesn't blend with the marker ink as much. Now, chart pack markers, this thing is gold. With Prismacolor markers, it won't bleed and blend as much, but if it gets too wet, it will. But I find that this ink is probably the best. So what I did is I traced those shapes with a template, like so. Used the straight edge on the side for the cube and the cone and the cylinder, and I used an ellipse template to round out these edges. A little bit of freehand too. Now, we're going to start off shading the sphere. And I'm going to show a direction of light coming from here. For the cube, it's going to be coming from here. The cone, it's coming from here. And of course, here. Now, one thing I'd like for you to do before we get started is to mark your markers. What I mean by that is when you have all your markers laying on your desk and you're working really quickly and you gotta grab the next marker so that everything is still wet and blends really smoothly, sometimes it can be very difficult to know which one is 10% gray, 20%, 30%, 40, 50, 60. Now if I showed you all these, you tell me which one's which. You couldn't, because you had to look really closely at the marking right here in really small 8-point font. Now, that's really troublesome, because sometimes you're fumbling around and your marker work will dry before you can blend it. So what I like to do is, on the end caps, I've written a 1. I've written a 2 for a 20% gray, and I've written 3. And you can go on like that for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And what that does is, from a side view, you'll immediately know, oh, that's a 30% gray, 20, 10%. When you go like this, you can see immediately which gray to pick out. It's a little trick that I've learned over the years. So, let's get started. Okay, to start out, I'm going to take a 10% gray and I'm going to work myself from 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. Now, I know that there's going to be somewhat of a white highlight right here, so I'm going to draw a circle for that. And from that point on, I know that everything else is at least darker than that highlight, right? Now I'm shading from upper left down to lower right, and this is my preference in this manner. I've seen some people go like this and fill up the space, and that's okay. I just prefer to work from upper left to lower right because I'm right-handed. And I'm tilting my body currently because I'm trying to keep this piece of paper from rotating, just so that you can always get a constant view. So as you can see, I left a white mark right here because usually the paper is the whitest spot. And if you leave it alone and darken everything around it, you can get some nice effect. So if this is the whitest spot and that's 10, what I like to do is move a little bit over and start with my 2 gray, 20% gray. Remember, leave a gap. Try to blend in all your strokes. And if you ever see that there's strokes and there's a hard edge, you can always go back to your 1 and just press it down. See if that helps you blend it. This is a lot of marker ink already, but you see how well the Bienfang takes it. 30%. Now I'm going to move a little bit over again and not go all the way to the edge of the 2. Just give it some breathing room. And from this point on, it's crescents. Crescents of darkness on a sphere. Now there is a point when the paper can't take any more ink, and you'll know when that time comes, because the way the paper reacts is going to be totally different than what you're used to. Now that was the 30%. I'm going to use a 40%. See? I'm leaving a crescent. You see that weird edge that's really harsh? That's okay. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a 20%, not a 30%, but a 20%, and see if I could just blend it in. The reason why I don't use a 10% or 20%, it's kind of through experience. If it's too white, it might start lifting the color actually. 50%. Now, from this point on, I'm going to be very careful. And I'm just going to do a really slight sliver. Just enough to show that there's a core shadow going on. See that? Just blowing on it. It's okay to go over the lines. Now, This is a 60% gray. As you can see now, there's a core shadow forming. Okay. If you think that that edge is too harsh, you can start blending it in. What I like to use to blend it in is probably a 30% marker, which is going to try to soften this edge up a little bit. At the same time, add a darkness level of ink that would help blend it. If you used a 10% gray to do this, I don't think it would be that good of a bridge between the colors. Now, as you can see, this is getting a little bit harsh because I want a smooth transition, so I'm going to go from 30 to 10. This is a 10% gray. There you go. Now, let's move on to the cube. We're going to start out with 10%. And actually, we're going to cover the entire cube. Reason being, when light hits the cube, pretty much most of the surface is going to have a dark area, and I'll show you what this means. You can leave that edge as a highlight if you want. Now, I'm going to take my 20% gray. I'm going to do a gentle lifting. Press hard, lift, press hard, lift. And that gives you a really nice gradient effect from dark to light, because that's where the light's going to come from. And I'm going to do the same thing on this top surface. This top surface is going to be a little bit darker. Essentially, I'll just make this a 2 gray. Work from the back of the cube and bring it out. Three. This is a 30% gray. And if you're thinking, hey, they're all they're so similar in color. And you're right. Don't worry. Markers, we're going to layer them. And that's the beauty of them. I'm going to take a 40% and I'm going to start from this upper corner over here and do the same stroke. The reason why I want this going from dark to light is because usually on the ground there's going to be some reflected light that makes the cube a little bit lighter in this area. And it adds a little bit to the realism. That was a 40% gray. Now I'm going to take a 50% and just do a little bit more. I'm not going to take it all the way down to the edge. Just want to see what that looks like. Adds a little bit more contrast, which I'm a little bit more excited about. Look at that. Makes the other edges kind of pop. I'm going to take a 30% gray and I'm going to make it dark from here to here. Alright, see that? Maybe this is a little bit too light. Since this is 30%, That was the color of the surface anyway. Yeah, that works. But I still like to keep this from going dark to light. And if you think 50% wasn't enough, let's go 60%. Let's see how that is. Not bad, not bad. Looks pretty good. I think it could be a little bit darker coming in from here because it's set further in space. So I'm going to use a 40%. See how that looks. Just pull it. And this stroke is pretty good. Huh, not bad, not bad. Maybe I can even darken this a little bit more with a 20% gray and pull up. See how that looks. Not bad. And it's a 10% gray. Just want to smooth it out. And that's a cube. Let's try the cone. The cone, again, let's start out with 10% gray. And we're going to leave a highlight going down the middle. And it's going to be in the shape of a triangle, like this. So I'm going to just draw that in now. And just fill in the blanks. Fill in the shape, just like as if it was a coloring book. Okay, great. So what you have now is the highlight, super highlight, and it gets darker as it wraps around. What we're going to do is we're going to make it even darker in this area, but we're going to section it off in 20% gray, 30% gray, things like that. Okay, start from here with a, oops, go to 20% gray. 20% gray, and work our way. I'm going to leave a space from here to here. %, gray. %, gray. As I go down the line. Okay. And 50% gray. Now this time, I want that core shadow to be dark. So that's a 60% gray. And let's see if I hit it with a 70% gray and I use the fine nib. That's pretty good. Maybe it's a little too sharp. I'm going to go back to a 50% gray. Maybe blend it out a little bit. %, gray. Not bad. And that's what it should look like. Now let's go for the cylinder. Again, I'm going to section off the highlight, which is probably going to be right about here. right about here, and copying how I shaded in the surface of the cube from dark in the back to light in the front. That's the same thing we're going to do for the surface of this cylinder. It's going to be dark from the back, light in the front as it comes close to this highlight right around here. That's 10% gray. We're going to move to 20%, and we're going to move a little bit away from the edge of that, and make sure you always keep that in mind, that you always want to show off a little bit of the 10% so that there's a gradation. Let's move to 30%. Back off. 30% there. And also I'm going to start darkening here. Oh, look at that. Not bad. 40%. Don't go all the way to the edge. Move a little bit back. Hit it with a 4. And at this point too, you don't need to go all the way back to the back of the cylinder because there's going to be a little bit of ambient light and it helps you round out the form. And this is a 50% gray. And I'm just going to go over the top surface of this. And I'm going to try to blend it with a 20%, just so that there's a smooth transition. I'll take a 60% gray and see if I can just right now put the core shadow in there. This is 70%. It's always a little bit too dark. That's okay. I'll take a 40%. I'm going to try to blend the edges so it's not that harsh. And that's good. I think that works. Perfect. And maybe it should be a little bit darker right around there so that the form kind of moves in. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and this is basically how you shade simple basic shapes with markers. Prismacolor markers are really good because of their neutral gray value. Bienfang paper is good because it can take a lot of abuse, and as you can see, it kind of already bled through some of it, but it's great. If you have any comments, please leave them below, and if you have any suggestions to make the tutorials better, please let me know as well. Thanks.